Hello again. So today I'm going to talk about nutrition in training and racing, and it's based on my current understanding and research. I'm not a nutritionist and I'm not a physiologist, but I am a coach with a lot of experience, and I've worked with a lot of athletes, and also I've been an athlete myself and eaten and drunk various things, some of which have improved my performance and some of it may not have improved my performance. So it would be great if we could initiate some sort of discussion. So the distinction between training and racing is something that I think is very important to keep in mind. In training, you may not be optimizing your performance in a given training session. For instance, you might be tired from the day before or the training session before if you train twice a day, and therefore that actual session might not be optimal in terms of performance, but you want it to be optimal in terms of training effect. So you may go through, for instance, if you went on a big training camp, you might be particularly tired at the end of the 1 week training camp, and you might not be performing at the end of the week as well as you were performing at the start of the week, but after some recovery your body will have bounced back and you will have improved your fitness and therefore your ultimate performance. In a race or event or a personal challenge, you are optimizing your performance in that event, so you'll be well rested going into it, fully nutritionally fueled, so you've got all your glycogen reserves and everything, and you're ready to perform at your best. And during the event you want to eat optimally. Okay, so training is practice, and training for improvement of your physiology, your psychology, and your skills. And racing is I'll use the term racing in general for your event or a personal challenge. So if we're doing a long ultra endurance event, for instance, or an endurance event that lasts maybe more than 3 or 4 hours, then your ability to oxidize fat is important, and because it helps you to use less glycogen, and that's the theory anyway. And in terms of while you're performing during the event, if you eat carbohydrates during your event, that also avoids using. You can use those carbohydrates to fuel your muscles and the contractions, and therefore you can last a lot longer on your carbohydrate reserves than you might do if you didn't eat properly. And obviously you have to hydrate properly, and because if you get dehydrated then you won't perform as well. So they will deal with hydration first. Hydration, a lot of people don't drink enough on the bike, and it's a useful strategy to put something in your drink. I've personally found that using drink mixers to help your performance make a big difference to your endurance on long rides, and also your performance when it's a more variable event where you've got to perform at high intensities and recover from that. So use sports products, they're good, or make your own. There are some recipes online, and basically all you're looking for is to add a bit of carbohydrates, and if you're quite a salty sweater, add some sodium chloride, some salt into your bottle if you want to make your own. But off-the-shelf products are designed to be optimal for your performance, use the correct dose, and they're convenient, so that's good. So the big thing at the moment, so if you can be more effective at oxidizing fat, then you can you use fat as a fuel source, which is important for endurance events, because you can go faster for longer without using your muscle glycogen. And your fat reserves are effectively infinite. Even the most skinny person, the skinny marathon runner or cyclist, has enough fat reserves for last for in practical terms forever, because you wouldn't go for days without eating, and therefore everything would get replenished. Whereas you can only last for maybe an hour at a very high intensity around your functional threshold power, your functional threshold pace, your anaerobic threshold heart rate, on your glycogen reserves, and then they'd be short, and therefore you would have to use fat as a fuel source. You have to slow down until you can replenish these glycogen reserves, which you can do by eating carbohydrates. There seem to be various nutritional strategies for improving fat oxidation, and obviously as you ride longer and do more training volume, your fat oxidation will get better. So riding in your endurance zone, your training zone 2, or a little bit below your aerobic threshold, which we've talked about in previous videos, will improve your fat oxidation, and therefore you'll be able to go faster without dipping into your glycogen reserves. But there are also some nutritional strategies that you can use, and these are basically, if you have depleted glycogen reserves and you ride your bike, you'll use more fat. So for instance, if you go for a long ride and you don't eat any carbohydrates, your body will use more fat, and therefore it'll get better at it. So this can be a long ride where you don't eat very much for the first couple of hours, or you just drink water or an electrolyte solution, or it can be a fasted ride or run or other type exercise that you might do in the morning where you haven't eaten your before breakfast. And these strategies can improve your fat oxidation. The warning here is that you have to be careful, because it can increase the likelihood of injury. I've got a very good friend who's an elite triathlon coach, and he says they don't do fasted training sessions anymore with the elite athletes because they were more likely to get injured, and that was because that they weren't able to fuel properly between the actual fasted training session and the next training session, which might have been a higher intensity training session. And as a consequence, if you don't fuel properly before a high intensity training session, you won't get as much out of it. And more recently, there's this strategy known as sleep. It's labelled sleep low. Excuse the quotes, it's not something I normally do. They're not to be confused with the altitude training strategy, which might be train high, sleep low, for instance. Sleep low is sleep with low carbohydrates in your system. And this strategy, in simple terms, is that you do a workout after normally fueled after a meal. Maybe you might do it after your evening meal, or you might do it in the afternoon after you've had your lunch and a carbohydrate related snack, so you get a really good performance in your high intensity training session in the afternoon. In the meals you eat subsequently before you go to bed, you don't eat any carbohydrates, and therefore it's difficult for your muscle glycogen to regenerate. And then in the morning you do a fasted ride or run or training session, which is obviously you've then got depleted glycogen reserves, because you've depleted your glycogen reserves in the afternoon of the previous day, and then you can your training, you get a better fat oxidation, and that obviously improves, because the things you practice you get better at, and that's in simple terms. If you, like I've said before, if you spend all the time sitting on the settee watching telly, you'll get better at that, and you'll be able to spend more time without getting bored sitting on the settee watching telly. And that, obviously, to a certain extent, that's true. Obviously, if you do too much, something can go wrong, and as I've already mentioned, the injury risks. So that's a good strategy, and this sleep low approach seems to be quite a good way to go. It appears to improve. There's some scientific papers. It's not just anecdotal information here. There are scientific papers that say that it'll improve fat oxidation, improves performance, and even a 4-day protocol of depleting your glycogen reserves in the afternoon, no carbs with your evening meal, and training fasted in the morning can make a difference to performance. And that's even over short events like 10 kilometers running, or 40-minute a 40-kilometer cycling time trial. So like even around an hour, people are making benefits in performance. And the reasons aren't well known for this. It does appear to improve fat oxidation, but that wasn't the case in certainly one of the papers that I read. The performance improved, but the fat oxidation didn't increase. And that's the same with a lot of physiology. As you read more into it, because bodies are so complicated, it's not really fully understood. But this strategy seems to work. It seems to be fairly safe, and it can be fitted into your training schedule quite easily. Whereas a high-fat diet, high-fat, low-carb diets, which also have been shown to improve your fat oxidation, your fat metabolism, they're not that easy to implement, and also they don't. It's debatable whether you can perform. They reduce your performance at higher intensities, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so that's a good strategy. Obviously, your longer rides, you're trying to improve your aerobic system, and that will naturally improve your fat oxidation, and therefore you'll be able to ride faster. Basically, the training makes you ride faster. So these are just strategies. Like I went to a conference and somebody said, "You're talking a lot about nutrition, which is the icing on the cake. But what about the cake?" So you have to train to get better. It's not like implementing this strategy will instantly make you better. It's just part of your training. In racing, it's totally different. You want to be eating carbohydrates because that spares your glycogen reserves. It helps you fuel along the way, and therefore you don't want to be fasted. You want to be fully fueled when you start your event. You want to be go to your normal weight, your event weight. That might be carrying a little bit of extra weight if you're going into a long, multiple weeks ultra endurance event. So eat carbs during your build up to your event and during the event. And it seems to be that you have to around about 30 grams per hour of carbohydrates, not of calories, not of food, of carbohydrates. So look at the packaging of whatever you're eating. Seems to be that that's the recommended starting point. Less than 20 doesn't appear to make a lot of difference to sparing your glycogen reserves, so you have to be eating quite a lot. And if you're going to go above 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, then you have to get them from multiple sources like fructose and glucose, and some products will use multiple sources of carbohydrate in the recipe. So look for those if you're going to be eating a lot. And there seems to be some evidence that if the longer the event, the more you have to eat. So because obviously you deplete your reserves, the reserves that you've got more quickly over time, and therefore you have to replace more if you're continuing the event for longer. And obviously when you finish, if you have a larger meal at the end, that needs to be carbohydrates. If it's a multi-day event, you're not trying to sleep low in your event. You're trying to sleep as fully fueled as possible. You want to get yourself back into the best shape possible and move on. So that's racing. And let's go back to this sleep low strategy. So because I've done a bit of thinking about this, and also the injury risk. And also I've read some papers about the various approaches. So it seems that I would split your training sessions in. So you've got your high intensity training sessions. If we were to look at a sort of slightly polarized approach, or as Stephen Seiler's now calling them, your high, your large damage. You need to spend a lot of time recovering. So your hard training sessions, let's call them. Which you need to spend time recovering from. Now these you don't want to be doing fasted. You don't want to be doing these sessions after a sleep low event, because they're already stressing your body heavily, and therefore you don't want to be loading your system more. The point of these sessions is to be building your fitness physiologically as by the training session, not by the nutritional strategy. However, some of these sessions you can then it used to be in traditional sport in the UK that you would race on a Saturday afternoon, for instance, and then you'd go for a long bike ride or run on a Sunday morning, and therefore you would be partially depleted. So traditionally people used to do this anyway. So you could eat fewer or not so many carbs after some of your high intensity sessions, maybe your Tuesday interval session. Don't eat carbs that evening and go for a very easy training session on your Wednesday morning. And you could use this 2 or 3 times a week. And that would be a relatively safe way of sleeping low and utilising this protocol to improve your fat oxidation. I wouldn't do it before your extra long ride, and I certainly wouldn't be doing a super long ride without taking in any carbohydrates, because you want to learn to ride along, and that's both a mental and a physical training strategy. So I hope this has been useful. I'd love to get your comments, and I'd love to learn more about your experiences, because it's such a difficult thing to test. There are so many variables. Anything to do with long training sessions is very difficult. Anything to do with long events is very difficult to test, because people can't do them very often. It takes a lot of time to recover from them. There's a lot going on. So and then to try and do that several days in a row, for instance, is obviously incredibly difficult. So it's been a bit of a longer one than usual. I hope you found it useful. Please let me know how you get on with any of these strategies, how you found them, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.